Hi, welcome back to the Always Right podcast. I'm author Carissa DeLay.
And I'm author Jamie Vendera. And
Hmm.
let's get this show on the road. You're not going to let me do
Look at
this.
you. Today we're doing another episode of Echoes of Authors Past. Yeah, so this is where we talk about authors from the past that are no longer here. We can't interview them, but we try to find out as much as we can about them. Which, you know what I found when I'm researching these authors is they don't have a lot of backstory with their personal lives, just their writing
Yeah.
and their
Well,
financial
plus we're
situations.
talking about way back when, so it's not plastered all over social media. So,
Way back when the guy died in 1918.
yeah, but there was no internet back then.
So
So we'd have
we
all the
should have
smut out there. We
we
know
have
everything
historical
about him.
records of America and all these other things. Why can't
It is kind of sad that this guy doesn't, because the one thing I liked about him, and I know we'll get into it, is the fact that he was a lawyer and became an author. Because my favorite author, Terry Brooks, same thing. He was a lawyer. It's like, I prefer writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So today we're going to talk about Ingersoll Lockwood. He was born 1841 and died in 1918. Let's talk about this American lawyer and writer, best known for his fantasy stuff, his children's fantasy, and then later became this political satire writer. So he's kind of like this author I thought would be really cool to cover with the coincidence. You know, it's almost like a 1800s Simpsons.
Yes, it
Yeah,
really is.
it is. It's
The,
like
the,
if the Simpsons were in the 1800s, it would be Ingersoll would be their writer.
yeah, and I mean, I never read any of these books, but I did always find it crazy because generally, an author sticks to one genre, or maybe not
Mhm.
so much today, but way
Yeah,
back when. Like, look at Stephen
way
King.
back when.
Yeah, like he had to write under like Bachman and other things if he wanted to do something else besides horror. But this guy was writing children's books and then political satire. That
Mhm.
is a huge jump. But there is
Well, and he was
connections
a
between the
lawyer.
two. Yep, well, that's
So
true.
then he was writing nonfiction, you know, like whatever they wrote back then for, you know, my neighbor, he stepped on my farm. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's talk about first just Ingersoll,
Yeah.
uh, his career in law. He initially worked as a lawyer and had notable career in the legal practice. So he served as a clerk in the U.S. Customs House in New York, which is interesting. His legal background influenced some of the satirical takes on society and political things that we'll find later in his writings. Um, and then his literary career, he transitioned from that law to literature. What?
Yeah, he was born when? Because, okay, 41, 51, 61, 71, 81. That's crazy that he became an author in his 50s. I had seen something not too long ago about it's never too late, and it showed like Colonel Sanders started KFC in his 70s or whatever, and this became an actor in their 40s. So here's a man who been a lawyer probably most of his life, and then in his 49, 50, 51, he became
Switched
an author.
switch directions. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
switch directions.
insane.
You know, it's like, well, yeah. So, like, that's something that I did skip over because there's not a lot about his early life. He was born April 2nd in 1841 in New York City. But like I said, there's not a lot about his life as personal as there is his literary status. But he accumulated a rich environment that encouraged intellectual pursuits. But he graduated from law school in New York. It was I don't know if that was the New York Law School or if it was like a different one in New York. So I just put that like a New York Law School in 1860, and then went on to practice law. Uh, we talk about him being a lawyer, and he's decided he's going to join the literature community, and that's let's see what I say what that 1890s.
Yeah,
So yeah, this is like 25 years before he dies.
yeah. He
Yeah.
is mid 70s, so he didn't have a long career as an author.
Yeah. So he kind of he in the in
Holy
eight
crud.
what?
I've been an author for 20, well, no, I started writing 25 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Been an author
Oh,
for a
your
long time.
time's a ticking. Your biological time is ticking as an
Yeah,
author.
I'm getting a little worried.
Get age of the sigil out.
So, yeah, and you'd be like, and you'll do the eulogy.
Listen,
And one thing we wish he would have done is finish Age of the Sigil.
yes, I will be investing in a pseudo-right to finish that one if so.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I'm
So,
leaving it to you to finish all of my unfinished novels.
Oh my gosh.
I know, a lot of work.
Yeah, I don't know if I can even tackle that. I'm still working on my own, so I'm doing
Yeah,
anything right
but
now.
all
It's
mine
easier.
combined are less word will be less pages than your one novel. The way I
True.
write.
Yes.
So
All right. So in 1890 he published his first children's book,
the
and this kind of
travels. Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to
oh,
step over you.
what did you say?
I was going to say the name of the book.
Oh, well, we haven't got that far yet.
Okay, so let's
Yeah,
talk
I was
about
kind of like
the
I'm
main
little
character.
pieces, little morsels,
You
like
want
so.
to sneak it in on the audience to be like, wait a minute,
Hmm.
what does this have to do with today?
Yes, yes, Ingersoll. We're talking
Yep.
about Ingersoll. All right. So then, after he's kind of solidified himself as a children's author, he later, or not later, he later writes political satire, like we said. But Lockwood's fantasy novels often reflect this Victorian era with a spirit of like exploration and adventure and this fascination with like the mystical. This is like pre C.S. Lewis,
Yeah,
and when
fun
I'm reading,
fantasy.
yeah, yeah. So I'm reading when I'm reading about these books, I find it interesting is they kind of are like the the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in a sense
Yeah,
because yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So, all right. So let's just talk about some of these peculiar titles, these interesting titles. The notable works, and this is featuring a specific character named
Yep.
Baron Trump. And I just find I just find it very fascinating. I'm like, wow, this was 1890. And so here we have the travels and adventures of Little Baron Trump and his wonderful dog, Bulger. And this was published in 1890. So, Jamie, if you read your notes today, can you give me a little synopsis?
Yeah, so like he lives in this mansion, and I got to remember there was like a portal. I got to read. Yeah, it was in a basement. I was thinking it was in a room. So he would take his dog Bulger, and they would go on these adventures to other worlds, and they would meet all these crazy, not really monsters, but these different type of
Definitely magical
beings.
beings. Yeah, these
Yeah,
magical
magical
beings.
beings, and and there would be each adventure. It was like to teach you a moral lesson.
Mhm.
It was always in that. And I haven't read these books, but I remember hearing about them.
Yeah.
So kind of like you said, Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, Wizard of Oz. A light Wizard of Oz, not like the actual books, more like the movie.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yes. Each of these adventures, like they try to, it seems based on the synopsis that I got from these, they all try to teach some kind of like uh,
lesson.
lesson of bravery, friendship, and these wonders of the world with like a element of fantasy.
Yeah,
Um,
it reminded me because I had two make believe friends, Frobby and Cocoon.
these were your make believe friends.
Yes, I don't know
Your
where I came up
imaginary
with those
friends.
names. Drive my mom nuts. Same thing though. I remember we'd have a magical door or something I'd walk through, and in my imagination we would transfer to another world, and we meet all these crazy beings. So when I've heard about this series, and this was years ago, I was like, wow, it's kind of like every child's imagination. He's
Mhm.
tapping into that. The fun part of your childhood.
You say every child. I didn't have imaginary friends.
You don't remember them.
No, I didn't. I literally did. I just something about like I was tapped into the reality of like maybe I don't know a different mentality.
Well, it
I don't
sucks
know.
to be you then, because Frobby and
It
Cocoon
does
were
because
awesome.
yeah, it does in a sense because I wish I had stories to say I had an imaginary friend. I had a creepy doll named Tina.
Well, that did she talk back to you in your imagination?
No, but like if you would see this doll, even like my kids, it's like almost like the half sister of Annabelle or something.
Okay, off topic, not for this podcast. Ask me later about my remote control R2D2, and that's another story. That's something for more of a paranormal podcast.
Okay. All right. Noted. Ask
Yes,
about
R2D2.
all right. So after the 1890 publication of that first book, he later wrote the second book for Baron Trump's series, which was Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. This one was published in 1893. This is like the sequel, and this he discovers a hidden thing underground, this underground world. Like before, it was in the basement of the mansion. Now it's this hidden underground world, and He's armed with a map that he receives from his mentor.
The
And what is his
Don.
mentor's name?
Yeah, Don. Like say the Don.
Don. I
Yes.
don't know if Don's name was Donald. I don't know.
Thanks, Don.
Don and Baron.
Don,
Yes.
yeah, isn't that a coincidence?
Very, like I said, pre-Simpsons. This is like yeah. So Baron travels through these mysterious tunnels, enters these strange civilizations, these mythical creatures, and these various challenges that test his wit and resourcefulness. And he navigates this underground realm, and Baron learns about these complexities of human nature and the importance of courage and friendship. So the story is apparently very imaginative for the time, and the landscape and everything's very whimsical. And this he has, I guess, a notable gift for storytelling, Lockwood, and he's known for that. But maybe it's his downfall is his satire, his
Yeah.
political satire.
Yeah, because his children's books were like hugely popular
Yeah.
during that time.
Yeah, and so like that was, and I feel like storytelling, almost like folklore and things like that, expounding on that and being more descriptive, just that was what people, and I don't know about the percentage of people who could read back then, but just storytelling in general would be something that was desired since they didn't have TV, they didn't have radio. The imagination needed to be like, taken away from, everyday life. And not like some of the Hemingways and things that we talk about where they essentially look at nature as nature is and not look at the fantastical version of nature.
Yeah, and he was writing these during like a really crazy time in history. I mean, there was so
Yeah.
much happening politically. I mean,
Yeah. So,
industrialization, everything
yeah.
was
So
booming.
I did, yeah, I put that in the notes specifically because I want people to understand where he was coming from, what was happening in his time politically. So I put out some, and I put these notes in here, Jamie, and I itemized them so they'd be easy for you to read as if we were having a conversation.
Yeah, because we've had this conversation, and as I was reading these this morning, I was like, she loves me.
I was like, I need to write this so it's like we're having a conversation and it's not like you're reading a
And you
paragraph.
just seen how I did that. Like, this was during American history. I was reading my bullet point, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody caught it till I told them.
Mm-hmm. They probably did.
Yep,
Like,
probably. I'll keep lying to myself. But it was crazy because, there were these people who own corporations and buildings, and they had their interests, and then there was those wars between the laborers, and I'm sure it
and this,
was like unions and just
well, yeah, this is very a lot. This is a time of rapid industrialization. A lot was happening then, where you have a lot of these corporations and monopolies, which was eventually became illegal. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to have a monopoly in the United States.
yep.
But fun facts, like a lot of the monopolies are country or companies outside this country, but they sell in America. Like glasses, all eyeglasses, I think, are made by the exact same company.
Wow.
They just sell off their designs to different companies, like Michael Kors or Coach or
Hmm.
whoever you're buying your glasses from, come from the same company. They have just different versions of quality and designs, and
Crazy.
this is all the Michael Kors design, or this is all the different da 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 da. I read a thing on that, and then watched a video on that long, long time ago about like how that is, and that's the same thing like with like it used to be like diamonds that were that way, but I mean it's not anymore like that now that they can manufacture diamonds. But anyways, moving on. So a lot of this caused tension because you've got these big corporations coming in, you've got this industrial, you're losing that whole small business in a sense, like
Yeah,
the
farmers, workers, they feel like they
yeah.
were left behind. So the rich were getting richer, poor were getting poorer.
Yeah, there was that also that rise of populism. The farmers and the working class people were left behind, like you said, and the populist party kind of emerged around the 1980s anyways. Um, Advocating for reforms like direct election of senators and monetary changes. There's all this upheaval. They're fighting against what they saw as like capitalism and very similar stuff we're seeing today with the
Yeah,
divide.
and like this is like me being in union years ago. This is when you started seeing organized labor, and they were striking. They wanted better wages, and then we had like the Pullman strike of 1894 was an example, and it was showing how the tension between the laborers and the industrialists were unfolding. So I know he based a lot of his satire on that time, and politically how we were being shaped.
This was looked at like the Gilded Age because on the surface things looked prosperous, but beneath the surface there was this widespread corruption going on, and money had such a big influence. I mean, this is probably like, when did the mobs start becoming like a big thing? You're going to see a lot of that underground development stuff because you're seeing all that kind of fester in the behind the scenes. So this is the things that he was dealing with. Not to mention the race relations were another hot topic.
Jim
Uh,
Crow law started. Yeah.
yeah, after the Civil War, the Jim Crow laws started to be enforced. So there's a lot of very parallel things happening. A lot of people were fighting against and advocating for civil rights and social justice, and the women's suffrage movement. You know, the women were really starting to organize and fight against their right to vote. So there's so many parallels in um, Ingersoll's timeline, and then to have these book titles. We read the children's books. We understand there are a lot of Lockwood's parallels in his political background. Let's talk about the books that he wrote as a reflection of this timeline. Do you want to start with this?
The Great American Mystery.
Yes.
And that starts with this premise about a political scandal that really shakes up the nation. I'm sorry. This is one of those nerve damage days. I'm going to sound like this throughout the.
Well, then I'll just take over. So this story, it
I'll
revolves.
find it here. I forget
Oh,
what movie it was. It's like, all right, here we go. Uh, so now I'm back. So that story revolves around the mysterious figure known as the Great Unknown. And he's pulling the strings from behind the scenes, stirring up all sorts of
like the
trouble.
Wizard of Oz.
Yes, and he's politically manipulating the country. And there's a mix of characters, of politicians, journalists, everyday citizens as they navigate through all of this chaos. And it really shows you the humors and public perception, how it can impact politics, which
Mm-hmm.
is honestly, it's kind of relevant today. We are so divided as a country. You could go on one news station and it's like blah 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 blah, the left suck. You go another one, blah blah, the right suck. So there's all this division and all this turmoil, and that's being stirred up. So it shows you this happened throughout history. It isn't just now. Everyone's like, this is the worst time in politics.
Mm-hmm.
No, we just didn't have the internet back in the 18 and 1900s, so it
Yeah,
did exist.
yeah. So this book, the plot thickens and starts as these factions start to form and competing these competing ideologies, this social unrest, and it's questioning their political landscape, and like in the climax of the story, the identity of the great unknown. Now, the great unknown person is never technically identified. I mean, it's finally revealed essentially, but the actual persona is not.
Yep.
Um, which leads to a discussion about leadership and these dangers of unchecked powers. So when I'm it's like it's the great unknown is kind of like this mysterious Oz type situation, but it also reminds me. Did you watch the Leave the World Behind?
No, I do want to see that series though.
Yeah, so if you watch the movie, actually get into the book too because the book has a different ending, but it's very interesting about who's in
Oh, it's a
charge.
movie. I was thinking it was a series.
It's a book,
Yep.
and then it's a movie. Yes, but it's an interesting take on who's pulling the strings because it's no one person. It's a separate like entity that no one knows who it is. It's like strange. It's creepy at the same time. So this really like reminded me of that. You don't know who's pulling the strings.
And we don't.
Right, right, right. It's fascinating because of how it ends and how he uses his platform of being in the community as a lawyer and being in this scene to kind of like create a fiction story essentially. Um, the key figure, like I said, this great unknown or this person, um, is mysterious presence that seems to manipulate events and stir political intrigue. But it's like it embodies these shady figures of bureaucracy that are behind the scenes. And there's another book that talks about this that is called the first. Is it called the first family or something, or the first men or something like that? I'll have to look that one up and come back on a later podcast and
I thought you were going to mention. I thought you were talking about the next book, and you got mentioned in here.
oh, okay. Yeah, here's the mic drop. Then we're talking about this book that kind of like sets the scene of uh, Ingersoll's, political stuff in the 1800s or 1890s. And then he decides to drop this book called The Last President.
Yeah, he goes all in.
Yeah, just like all in. I'm gonna put all on red.
Yeah, and so we elect this populist leader, and he's a controversial figure, and his policies are creating unrest and divide in the public even more. So that's
Mm-hmm.
like the split of the country, and everyone's hating each other.
He depicts different characters that represent various social and political views, showing how the polarized country has become. And many people feel anxious about the direction of the country's heading, and many uh, are like worried about the president and the struggles implemented with his agenda and all this chaos. Um, the story builds. It escalates into like a crisis. The president has to make a tough decision that will shape the country's future, and ending gives off this real sense of uncertainty about democracy itself. So this is
And
just like when I'm reading all this stuff and I'm going down this spiral, I'm like, this is just crazy.
yeah,
I literally was like,
yeah, it ends on a cliffhanger too, and so you're like wondering what happens. I'm like, whoo, this
mhm.
isn't depicting the future, because it is kind of Simpsons eerie.
It is very Simpsons, and it's like overall these books critique the political environment of his timeline, but they resonate the challenges that we face today, and it's just an interesting story that reflects these complexities. So, but at the same time, for and we're not making this a political episode at all. This is more about Ingersoll, because this was obviously a very talented writer and someone who went out on a limb to write political satire in a time of upheaval and a lot of questioning. But I guess I don't know. It was very imaginative for the time to write stuff like that. Um,
Yeah, probably very outspoken. But again, like you said earlier, he was a lawyer, so he had a lot that he could draw from with what he's seen.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. At the same time, so when in this timeline, you got to realize they had newspapers, they had they had a lot of poetry, they had a lot of artwork, they had different ways that people could express themselves. So these books here, I don't think these books did quite as well, and he kind of faded off after this. It was almost like people didn't want to hear it. They needed hope, and he didn't really give them hope. He gave them when he leaves that with that cliffhanger, he doesn't give them a what's the word? It's kind of like not like the Cinderella story, but like what is that called? Like the underdog doesn't succeed.
Yeah, so you don't walk away from the book thinking, oh, I know where this is leading and everything's going to
Mm-hmm.
be okay. You're left thinking, oh, crud.
Mm-hmm.
Is it over? Do we lose? so,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so
We don't know a lot about his personal life, including whether or not he was married or his family background, which is crazy. I would assume someone would, especially with people that do genealogy, there would be something about his
hmm
family life. There would be some kind of census or something. He lived during a time of significant social and political change in America, which may have influenced just in general, like what he did with his life. I don't know. But later, we know that his writing career began, and he faced financial difficulties, which we see as well with
yeah,
lots of other people. We hear about a lot of authors that did really well in the beginning,
and in poverty.
Gutenberg, who invented the printing press. People who had, really great success in the beginning and then falls off. So maybe that's a rise and fall. Like it's a
Yeah.
rise and fall. Like you're rising and then you fall because of whatever decisions you decide to make.
Yeah, and by the time he died, he wasn't even in the public eye.
Yeah. Yeah. He was kind of like kind of faded back. And then he spent his later years in New York, and his works went largely unnoticed for decades until 2025 when the names are like, oh, that's interesting.
Yep. 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 Yep.
All right.
So, but I mean, this is whether you like political satire or like young adult fantasy fun books like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This guy was one. I can't say he's the first or one of the earliest, but he was definitely known for those books. I'm surprised they haven't made like a movie off of any of these.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, he obviously was well known for his fantasy storytelling, so people like that.
yeah. Well, that's what I meant for the fantasy. Everything with with Wicked and Wizard of Oz and Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, all of
Well,
those type of
Wicked
things.
wasn't written back then.
No, I'm saying,
Wicked
but
wasn't from like
as
another
it's
100
turned
years.
into a movie, I'm
Oh,
saying the whimsical things, that we see. You think, especially now that he's kind of back in the limelight with the name Trump, you think somebody be like, "Hey, wait a minute! He was a prolific writer. Kids would love this. We need to turn this into a movie."
yeah, yeah, and so I was thinking about this, where he was very well known and appreciated for his fantasy, but not his political satire. Maybe that gives you a glimpse as to people wanted to be taken out of the scenario. They wanted to be like, don't put me in reality. I don't want to deal with
Yeah,
reality.
and
So,
it could also be when you're going to write anything politically, and we talked about this earlier. I have friends that are artists who are on both sides of the fence, and I see when they talk about politics, they alienate a lot of their listeners. And I've seen like,
mhm,
I'll never listen to your music again because you had
yeah.
an opinion and you should have kept it to yourself. So even though it couldn't be as widespread back then because you didn't have social media, I wonder how many people he offended with those books.
Oh, that's true. I didn't even think about that. He probably did offend a lot of people
Yep.
because, he was kind of pointing fingers at the current administration in a
Hmm.
sense. And yeah, so I didn't even think about that. You're probably right. He probably did lose a lot of love for what he did. So,
And that could have affected his sales of his children's books as well.
yeah, but that's just a shout out to, don't talk about politics and religion, right?
Yep.
I feel like unless you're having a constructive conversation, because I do have friends I can have constructive conversations with, and I feel like at the same time with both religion and politics, if you're open minded to listen and hear people, you can learn a lot. But if you take one side and then just like I don't know, close out, I feel
Yeah,
like that's where the divide comes so strong.
it is. And I have good friends in different religions. I've spent time
Mhm,
in the Middle East and India.
mhm,
Here, even with politics, my closest best friends, some are right, some are left, but
mhm,
at least they'll talk to you. It's when
mhm,
you get so extreme in religion or politics that it could be, and this could be happening back in his time, you
mhm.
know?
Oh, absolutely was
Yeah.
happening back in this time because I know for a fact this is like this is probably let's see, this is 1890s, so this is probably 60 years after a lot of the well, probably even longer than that, probably during America's time when a lot of people were moving around and going from town to town and having religious fairs.
Yes.
A lot of people were doing the same thing. They were just setting up and like, come to our religion, come to our religion.
Hmm.
So he was, he was in a time where like the Mormons had already moved to Utah. So they'd already been through a lot of like interpersonal dynamics of religion in our country. So there was always that back scene too. Yeah, but that's what's really cool about history. Um, when you have so our history books might not give us the full account because it's just someone who told the story. But when you have authors like this, you get perspective. You know what I mean? They're not writing the history books; they're writing perspective, and they're putting it into their fiction.
Yep.
So, I always say there's always a little truth in there's a little truth in a lie.
And there's a little truth in all the fiction. You're right.
That's what. Isn't that the same thing? So
Oh, like
fiction
is a
is
big
fake,
lie. Yep.
not true. But there's a
You
there's
got
a
to
little
break it down for
jest.
Dave so that he understands.
My phone is ringing. I forgot to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Sorry about that
I
one.
put mine on Do Not Disturb for once. That's the first time ever.
Really? Instead of airplane mode?
Yes, I put
Nice.
it on Do Not Disturb. I learned something new in the last couple of weeks how to set that up.
Hmm. Well, so if you're interested in reading these books, you can go on Amazon and get the public domain version cheaper than you can get like the first edition copy that's like
Mm-hmm.
$9,000.
Yep, that's crazy.
What are you doing with your screen?
I'm not. Oh, it's doing the thing. Let me see if it'll make hearts. No, I don't even know how to make a heart.
Well, those are like glasses. What? this,
Usually it'll do little things like the balloons and the hearts. I didn't know how
no,
to
but
set
it's
up like
moving up and down.
what? Oh, I know why. Hold on. It's not anymore, right?
Yeah. What was going
It's that
on?
new iPad because it'll do the autofocus
Follow
and follow
you?
you. Yeah, and I'm always talking like this, so
I don't think you should have that setting on as much as you
it's
are. You're just
off.
like moving around. It's like,
Now I know what it's for. So I didn't
oh,
realize it, but now I know.
hmm,
All right.
the things you know. All
Yes,
right.
so head to
So,
Amazon.
yes, you can go over there. You can, or I mean, I didn't check Barnes and Noble, but I'm sure you can get these books and you can read them, have fun with them. 18th century Simpsons. All right. So it's been a good episode where we've covered another author from back in time who can't be interviewed today. And if you'd like to go and see more of our episodes, you can go to alwaysrightpodcast.com. Click on our little icons. You can go to all of our platforms and listen in the car, or you can go to YouTube and watch us and see our shining faces. Or if you'd like to reach out and say, you know what? I read these books, tell us your thoughts on them. You can go to our email at alwaysrightpodcast@gmail.com and give us your feedback or give us a feedback on our episode. That'd be great. We tend to like those comments.
Indeed.
Indeed. All right.
Indeed.
All right. Until next time, I'm author Carissa DeLay.
And I'm author Jamie Vanera, and we will see you in the next episode.
Until then, always right.